welcome to everybody. First of all, my name is Colin Patrick. So basically, what my designation is, I'm a reserve manager in South Africa, on private reserves, and then I also conduct tracker training in various fields. So those fields are generally in the ecotourism based field or the tactical tracking field in anti-poaching. So I think your summary about tracking as a craft in anti-poaching is a very interesting subject. It's something that obviously that's what I do and what I've been doing for a number of years. And I think the first thing I'm going to do is ask you guys a question. You don't have to answer, but think about it. Is how would you think, how important is tracking in the anti-poaching field? And we've got a saying is that in most anti-poaching situations, whether it be from a subsistent poacher to a poacher that's poaching for commercial reasons, whether it be somebody who's poaching fish or somebody who's poaching general game, all the way up to the flagship species like Rhino, there's one fundamental step that we need to have in place to be able to apprehend the suspects or follow up on the suspects, and that's simply tracking. So tracking is obviously very, very important in the anti-poaching field. Tracking has been with us for years and years. We've always used it. What has happened over the years, and particularly over the last 20 years, with the flagship species being poached more on a commercial basis, tracking has developed. So in the field that we're now using technology, we're using dogs in these follow-up operations with regards to tracking. But we've never ever been able to get away from the physical fact that a human being has to visually be able to see tracks and signs on the ground and make decisions accordingly with regards to follow-up operations. If we have a look, and I see you've gone to the next slide now. So what is poaching? So we can sort of take poaching and put it into various groups. And the first one, if I'm actually going to talk about, is the subsistence poaching. That's poaching where somebody is poaching for a survival need, basically to provide food for their family. In our realm in South Africa, that type of poaching we have seen diminished quite extensively, except for when COVID happened. We found that it had increased, but mainly due to people wanting to poach commercially. So subsistence poaching is normally a low-key type poaching. It's normally a poaching exercise that does not have a major effect on a species. If I then go to commercial poaching, and that's mainly what I deal with at the moment, is training people how to deal with that. And commercial poaching is something that is obviously creating a major threat for us in our conservation areas, where people are poaching for monetary value, and the normal thing is it's for an item. So for example, with Rhino, people are poaching Rhino not for the meat, but literally for a horn, and the meat gets left behind. That type of poaching, you normally have, your poachers are a different type of person or a different type of poacher. They often are a lot more aggressive, because the more money involved, the more aggressive normally somebody becomes. And in most conservation areas, that's the type of poaching that we're dealing with at the moment. Yeah. I think if you can maybe move on to the next, and I'll just give an idea, and
like this.
Onto the next slide.
Now these boots we don't see until over there again. So, you guys see that? Why is that? That is because the person stood here and removed them. Why does he want to remove them? Because he's walking barefoot, which we can see over here. Why does he not want to walk with shoes on?
To be quiet.
Sorry, say again?
To be quiet so he doesn't startle the animal.
You hear that? Because he's wanting to stalk up to something, perhaps. Okay. And then that same person you can see walking barefoot, he places his two shoes, and that's why you can see the two shoes put together like this. Because he places his shoes just down there like that. Okay. He spent a little bit of time assessing here, because you can see he did go down on one knee. And there's the knee, and we can see the long pants again, by the way. Look at the lines. Okay. He put his rifle like this, and watch. We can also see rhino tracks here, guys. Okay, all right. Then he shoots, and we know he shoots, and there we can see the rifle. We can obviously do forensic tests on the rifle and that. We can see also the type of rifle. Look at the lines. Did you guys see the lines over there? Okay. Then something interesting over here. This person, when he reloaded, obviously he fired a shot, didn't he? Okay. This person, did he reload quickly or slowly?
He was in a hurry.
Well, this person is a little bit negligent because he didn't pick up his dog. He didn't pick up his round. This is traceable. Okay? We can tell a couple of things by looking at this, and we can ask the professor and he'll tell us a couple of extra things about this. Okay? Because that is his forte. Alright? But there's a lot of things we can tell about this. If we have a look there, if I compare, if I remove a case from a shot round, if I fire a shot and I move it quickly, okay, I do this and I do this, what happens is this gets extracted, and when it comes back, and you must correct me if I'm wrong or add to my information please, when I extract it, this gets flicked back very quickly because of the speed. At some stage it flicks back and it knocks the side of the rifle. That's what it's doing to my rifle that I love very much at this stage, and it's not knocking the metal, it's knocking the wood. But Beyonce says at some stage he will be able to adapt it so it'll start knocking the metal. Okay? But it knocks the piece of the rifle and then bounces onto the ground. What it then creates is this indent. So do you see how it's not round there anymore? Look at that dent. Can you guys see that? This one that was lying there is a perfect circle. This one was extracted very slowly and it just fell out. Okay. Do you see how we're starting to see these differences and we're getting these motives going now? The next thing is if we look at these two, okay, because we've got a primer that is silver, not always the case though, we can assume that this thing was reloaded. You know that. You know what reloaded means? That means somebody has hand loaded it themselves. It's not factory ammunition, which is even more traceable. You know that. Okay. A lot of times if we look at certain of these things, and that's what you look on, and you guys can come and look closer, when somebody, and this is definitely not Beyonce that reloaded this, I can tell that, I'll explain why now. When somebody does the reloading process, at some stage you've got to put a substance on to lubricate the process so that you can form this thing back to its original state. But that lubricant is corrosive. So at some stage you've got to then remove that lubricant, because then it'll corrode the inside of your chamber of your rifle and things like that. But if you are not so good at doing it and don't clean your rounds, then that lubricant stays on, which means when I pick that round up and I hold it like this, what is happening? Okay. Remember, fingerprints can be left here, but generally after between 4 and 5 hours, they can become irrelevant often because of weather and things like that. But if we look here, here's a fingerprint that's stuck here and it's been there for months of the person who reloaded this, potentially. You see, you're interested. You see how there's a little bit of information that we get. You see that? Look at that. You see that there? Okay. All right. Okay. Interesting, eh? Yeah, that little bit of information and that.
So basically, what I'm doing there is I'm just describing a scene, and that's fundamentally giving you a little bit of a description about what trackers' roles are in the anti-poaching realm. There's sort of two roles. First of all, a person who's a good tracker in the anti-poaching field on follow-up operations, their ability to track or follow a suspect is very important. So that's following a track step by step, but obviously at speed. The next sort of aspect of it is then where you have a situation where you're using a tracker's ability to identify a crime scene. So somewhere where they actually are figuring out what happened and how it happened, and that is for intelligence or what we call information gathering. Now, I'm going to be quite clear with regards to that. Depending on where you are, whether you're in South Africa or what country you're on, there are legal requirements or legal regulations regarding that. Most game reserves and in South Africa, that if there is a poached rhino, for example, it's classified as a crime scene. And your first thing that you should do is identify the scene and then leave it and report to the authorities, and then not disturb it so that they can conduct the investigation. So just that we're clear on that. But obviously for running down on what they look at and things like that, there you can actually see it. A lot of information can be gathered at a scene, at a crime scene, where you have a poached animal, like in this example, a rhino. And those are things that a tracker would be able to do. And that's basically what I'm describing on that video. Hollie, if you can just add in there where you think, just so that you keep the flow of your presentation.
Okay, so I want the Rhino group who are unmuted now. If you had walked into this scene, if you had come upon this rhino, I want each of you to tell me, first off, what's your first, view of this? And you can tell me what you think those little yellow markers with numbers mean, but I want you to think more broadly than that. So I want each of you, and I will read your names in turn, to give me the 2 things that you think should be done. Once we've gone through all of you, Colin is going to describe what you should do and what order this should be done in, after, of course, the authorities have been alerted. So, Christine Wagner, if you are unmuted, can you come in here and say 2 things that you feel you should do, or once you see this, what are you seeing?
Hello, my name is Christine Wagner. I'm a second-year nature conservation student at TUT. I think it's very important when you come upon the scene, you must enter and leave the same marked route to leave as little footprint as possible. The yellow tags, they are markers for the exhibits. The evidence found, like a piece of paper, gum, anything that can help them investigate further on, that they can later on use to, when everything is removed, and they can later on use further on. I think it's very important to take photos of everything.
Okay, no, that's good, Christine. Do you want to reply to any of that, Colin, before we go on to Baran?
Yeah, no, very good, Christine. So that's one of your biggest things, is for the investigators, for the trackers, to correctly identify who was there, and that it's very important that whoever discovers it uses the same route in and out. So very good with that.
Okay, Baran, over to you. What 2 things or what signs are you looking for when you come upon this?
Yeah, as Christine said, the photography is very important in case any evidence is actually lost. You have a photo trail to follow. But I also think if you do come across the scene, it's important to first of all look at whether or not the horn has actually been removed. In this picture's case, it is. And to also, when it comes to DNA sampling, use a metal detector of sorts, and to look at the bones for bullets. And
okay, that's cool. Colin, do you want to reply to any of those comments?
Yeah, so generally with regards to equipment and that, what you're saying there, very good with DNA and metal detectors. A photograph is something, on that you gather a lot of evidence, and that evidence can be used in the future. Bearing in mind, if you're going to arrest the suspects later and it goes to prosecution, you need to build that evidence and relate that evidence to the judge with regards to what you found where. So yes. And then obviously the linkage, what you heard me describing in that short video clip with the spent case, what you're saying there with a metal detector, that's our link often to the rifle, which then links to the suspect that used that rifle. So very important to try and collect that projectile, and the metal detector is one of the best ways to do it.
Fantastic. Tom Gumane, what do you feel you should be looking for, or what evidence are you going to collect and how?
Hello, my name is Tom. So first of all, what we have to remember when you get into a crime scene is to remember that it's a poaching incident is a crime scene, so it has to be treated like any other crime scene. And another thing, we have to look for evidence on the ground with your poaching team.
Okay, and what evidence is that, Tom? Aside from the things that we've spoken about, DNA and perhaps bullet casings, what else would you be looking for?
Well, that will be if there's any knife or machete or dehoning machines left by the poachers on the ground.
Okay, Colin, do you want to reply to that one?
Yeah, so if we talk about evidence, we sort of classify things into evidence and information. So evidence is something that's quite factual, and I'm just generalizing here. Information is something that we can use in our follow-up process. And so you're 100% right with evidence with regards to that, is that it's something that we can link to our suspects. And if they've left any equipment behind, if there is, for example, a bottle that they drank out of, and we can collect DNA, things like that. And you want to identify that evidence. And then just to recap on what you just said there, yeah, it is a crime scene. So we must always bear in mind, we're discussing a crime scene and what you would look for, but we do have to remember the regulations is that crime scene is collected by a designated person who legally is able to do that for it to be able to be used in court.
Beautiful. Right, Christian Mulaja, what do you feel you can contribute here?
Yeah, after discovering an area, we should look around and try to find evidence that can contain or carry genetic material of the suspect, such as saliva, blood, or some other excretion, body excretion. That will help us to link the profile of the suspect to the killer, the real killer. Yeah, and we will also look for evidence such as tissues, knife, glove, or something like that, that can contain fingerprint of the poacher.
Okay, thank you, Christian. I'm going to go straight on to you, Opa. And there's one thing we haven't mentioned here, which is critical evidence, and Colin spoke of information as well. So Opa, please come in here.
My name is Opa Makubera, a TUT second year student at TUT. First thing when you should do when you come across this scene, you should stop and look before approaching the scene, get an overall picture of what you can see. This is where note taking and photography should start. And also, only 2 people are to approach the scene so that you do not ruin the evidence and everything there. And mark, as Christine said, you should mark your approach, the route, and leave by the same route you entered the scene. Yeah.
Okay, thank you very much. Well, over to you, Colin, to describe, go back to some of those and to describe what you should do and the order you should do it in.
Yeah, so I think Opa, you're right. Yeah, I always say when I am asked by either the police or somebody to go and observe at a crime scene and give feedback, is the first thing is slow the process down. So when you're looking at a process like that, you want to go step by step, and it must be very systematic. Tracking is quite systematic in the thing that you want to get the beginning of the story and you want to follow it all the way through until the end of the story. Now, I think, Hollie, what you're saying there is what we potentially have not mentioned is the tracks, because if we don't locate tracks of the suspect and then have the ability to follow those tracks, we are not going to be able to follow and apprehend the suspects. We can link them in the future with regards to items like DNA and things like that, but we do need to locate, particularly if it's a fresh carcass and we have the ability to potentially follow and arrest suspects, we have to locate those tracks, identify them, record them, and then start the follow-up process.
I see we've got a few raised hands here, and I think that's absolutely fine. So, Opa, would you like to ask your question, followed by Christine?
I left one of the most important things here, which is when you get to a scene like this, you should look if the perpetrators are still there, because you might get killed. You want to look if they are still there. Yeah. Thank you.
Colin, on that one?
Yeah, safety, security is always very important. Also bearing in mind, we're also in a conservation area in the case like that. So even predators, normally you would find predators at that stage, depending on how old the carcass was at a scene. So safety is always number one. Yeah.
Christine, your question.
No, I just wanted to say, I think it's very important to take GPS locations, because you want to know exactly where you are. You don't want to get lost when entering in that scene. in the middle of the bush. Yes, that's all. That's all.
Colin, over to you.
Yeah, so Christine, what you've just said there is the most important thing with regards to anything, whether you're wanting support, whether you're wanting a follow-up operation to take place, is recording that location. And the best way to record that location is by GPS position. Even on a follow-up operation, all we need to know the position and the direction of travel of the suspects we are tracking. So 100%, a GPS position is the first starting point of any operation, of any recording of any crime scene. Very good.
Cool. And then, Colin, I think it's worth mentioning, because this is a priority species, and with priority species, we are of the opinion these days that every individual counts. So what happens if we were to come upon this and see that it was a lactating female? What would be our course of action, and how quickly would we need to act?
Yeah, so one of the things you want to do is you want to be able to identify on that scene whether there was any other individuals involved in that scene. So potentially, and you take something like a white rhino, for example, where you might have a crash of rhino. So there might have been 3 or 4 rhino. Then you want to identify whether any other rhinos were on that scene and were also potentially poached, maybe wounded and ran off. And then that would also include then a calf. So the best way to do that is to actually, the two things is to first identify potential tracks that indicate that there are other rhino there, or a calf that has there, and then to see if, depending on how fresh the carcass is, if that rhino was lactating, you 100% right. And then you would have to go to the next step of alerting the correct people so that rhino calf or the potentially wounded rhino could be then located. If you had to ask me, the 2 main ways of locating either a wounded rhino or a rhino calf would be either air support, so using an aircraft or helicopter to actually try and locate that calf within the vicinity, or actually physically tracking that calf. Generally, a young calf will not wander far from the mother, so is to track that calf down, so that then the next step of actually capturing that calf and relocating it to a safe area would be then done.
Okay, and in terms of the ways in which rhinos are killed, I mean, certainly in East Africa, we've had a few rhinos dehorned with tranquilizer darts, which means they are actually still alive, and you have to be quite careful coming upon a scene. So how would you determine how this rhino was killed? Or not killed, as it may be.
Yeah, so there would be 4 ways. If you come across a dead rhino, the first incident would be a natural death. So a natural death, the easiest way generally to identify a natural death is the fact that the horns are still on. And then often natural death is either caused by predation with lions, so it's normally a younger individual, or you would find infighting, so bulls fighting bulls, and then you would find a lot of scarring and on the skin and puncture wounds on the rear, where a rhino's run away from another rhino but unfortunately was killed like that. Those are the general indications of a natural death. Of an unnatural death is obviously a bullet wound, but it's not always possible. The fact that the rhino has been dehorned, in the sense that the rhino horn has either been cut or chopped off, that would generally indicate that the rhino has been shot and poached. A darting, which we're not seeing too much anymore, it was prevalent at a stage. And there, normally what you're going to find is that the rhino is lying in a position, walking around, but a lot of blood. So a lot of blood on the face, unfortunately, because the horn cut off, and then the rhino is still moving. So there's, the heart is still pumping, and that means that there's blood flowing in that. So normally a very bloody faced rhino walking around it's not a very good, nice scene, but that's normally indicating a darted rhino. Poisoning, normally again cut off and that, but associated with something like water holes. So close to a waterhole vicinity like that, we often find that with a poisoned animal, often the predators don't feed on it too much. So yeah, that would be the situation with regards to that. Foaming at the mouth for poisoning, you've got to be careful of as well.
Okay, so moving on to the next slide then, Colin, which I'll let you go ahead with. and tell the students, and then I'll take over from there.
Okay, so I'm just going to sum up quickly. This slide is probably for us in our what we call tactical tracking the most important, because we have different sort of sectors that we operate in as an anti-poaching unit or in the anti-poaching realm, and we can classify it basically, if we have a look, as proactive and reactive. If I have to sum up that, most of our operations, most of our preparations are all based in the reactive realm. But it's actually not where we want to be. It's where we're forced to be. Being proactive is doing something there where you can actually have a situation where your suspects don't even enter because they see that you are so prepared that their chances of being caught are good. So they would rather not enter that area, and so you're basically deterring them. From that point of view, if I just handle that, being proactive is basically having the ability to detect during fence sweeps or area sweeps, checking for activity of poachers, checking your perimeter fences for entry of poachers, and that's so that then you can do that. And then the visualness of being prepared with regards to that. Another aspect of it would be, like what you've written there, is education. It's obviously a big thing, is we eventually, and it's a long-term approach, but you want to try and change the mindset of people with regards to why people would want to poach. That would be very important. On the reactive side, that's my forte. That's where I'm involved in. And there, what we're doing is there's various sort of things. Is what do we work with? So we work on majorly on our reporting, on our information gathering. The more accurate we gather a report, and that goes back to your crime scene, taking a shot report, doing a spoor report, like what I think Christina said is with the GPS position, you then enhancing the ability of the tracking team to actually do the follow-up operation. And with accurate reporting, that basically, that gets enhanced. We then have a look at what tools we've got effectively. And I'll pretty much tell you, a visual tracker nowadays, if I compare it to 20 years ago, we were tracking mainly suspects visually. That means a human being was tracking another human being. Most of our operations nowadays is a combination of a human being and a canine, so a dog. And using those two, the visual tracking ability of a human, but the scent tracking ability of a canine. And it all is about speed. And I think you guys have said that a little bit there. If I have a look at is everything's about speed. Is what I mean by speed is the ability to catch up to that person before they exit, and we cannot follow up again. Anybody add anything there quickly?
Yeah, I see there's some questions in the chat. So Johan, if you want to just take us through those questions before Colin has to go.
Mute. Thank you, Holly. Thank you, Colin. That was a fantastic presentation. There's a question from Dixon. I'm assuming that he perhaps came in a bit late because it covers a lot of the material that Colin did discuss. So Holly, so if you want to do a recap, if Colin needs to go, then that's okay. So in such a scene, what are the key details to collect? This is very important for my rangers, who are always the first key response team when such incidences happens.
Okay, I think what we'll do is probably skip that question for now. We will come back to it at the end when we deal with the zebra group. So yes, next question.
We'll do a recap on that. And then with all this skill to combat poaching in play, how come poachers are still being able to wreak havoc on the remaining rhino population in the wild? And what do you think should be done practically, put an end to the trend? Here in Nigeria, the main motivation to wildlife poaching is the bushmeat trade, and the skills around here is not as what you have brought up in your presentation. What advice would you give us to acquire these skills?
Colin, over to you.
So I missed a little bit of the first of it. I think you said in Nigeria it was mainly meat poaching.
Bushmeat trade, yes, Colin.
And yeah, so yeah, we a little bit, I would say, a bit advantaged here where we can use technology and things like that. I would, obviously one of the first things you want to do from a bushmeat trade is study, or we always say study your suspects. So identify what your suspects' trends are, and then look at upskilling your rangers accordingly. I'm not too sure whether they use Canine there, and I don't know what the size of the area is. But up those skills of the field rangers with their ability to track and to track as a team. There's a fundamental difference between a tracker that tracks an animal for various reasons, either in the ecotourism industry or things like that, to a tactical tracker. A tactical tracker works in a team, and that increases the momentum of the follow-up to be able to arrest the suspects. And that would be my key on doing that, is upskill those trackers to work together in a team and look at what tools you can use to more effectively track down your suspects. Those would be the first things that I do offhand with little information available.
Thank you. Next question, Johan.
Well, at this stage, these are all the questions that I can see in the chat.
Perfect. Okay, well, thank you, Colin. Is there anything you want to add, or I can continue from here?
I think just to sum off, and then I'm gonna say goodbye, is basically the whole thing is like what you're saying, is this is something that requires a lot of input from everybody. And I think every aspect of input, whether it be a person that's directly on what we call the coal face that's following up on the tracks, to a person that's playing a support role, is work together in a team. And I think you've put there is trust. Trust is a very big thing. It's something that you've got to have in the team, otherwise the team doesn't work effectively. And just go according to procedures, reporting, and stick with those systems with regards to that. And that generally leads to more successful operations in any anti-poaching realm.
Thank you. And one question about trust, Colin. In certain anti-poaching teams, the different groups, so your proactive, your reactive, and your priority species teams, they are sometimes kept in the dark as to what another team is doing, so that and that's why trust is also super important, because you have to believe the other team is following up in a way that links with your team. Is this something that is common in anti-poaching teams, or does everyone know what everyone is doing?
No, it is common in different things. And what it does is it does two things. First of all, it creates the trust. So it might seem like mistrust, but it creates the trust. And then the other thing about it is, from that point of view, it actually protects individuals. If I'm giving you a scenario now, if I'm approached by somebody to give out information on the whereabouts of Rhino, and I don't know where that whereabouts is because the organization I work for does not give that to me, well, then I can't give that information out. So it actually protects me for being in the situation where I could now be persuaded to do that. So that's quite an important aspect. It's a common thing used, I think, even in the military. And as long as you know what your duty is and you fulfill that duty, and you know there's another team that's fulfilling another duty, but for a common goal, then it does, I will tell you, it does work quite effectively with regards to that.
Beautiful. Thank you very much for your time, Colin. And we'll be very pleased to have you back again at some point. So thank you.
Thank you, Colin.
Thank you very much. Enjoy the rest of it. Have a good day. Bye.
Hollie, may I just quickly comment on the question by Dr. Akbula?
Yeah.
You and Colin is this morning, you are focusing on the question of tracking in a very specific part of the process and the reactive process. But I would just like to mention to Dr. Akbula, the other lectures in the series might answer that question far better. For instance, the lecture by the Black Mambas, who focused on the whole system, including community engagement, that you have to have in place to combat poaching. So what we can do, and I will chat to her later, perhaps we can put them in touch with the Black Mambas, and they would be far better able to then assist them with putting in place a whole system. Thank you.
Okay, moving on from there, then we can see that tracking really is a cornerstone in your base knowledge. it is really important to be able to point out that single direction. Which way have those poachers gone? So you also have to figure out motive. And of course, if it's a priority species like a rhino, you do have the motive. So tracking is then part the use of art and science. It uses new technology, but it really focuses on those age-old skills of tracking. And it really is something critical because it allows you to make a valuable contribution to anti-poaching. And it allows you to assess the situation. When you come upon a scene like that, is there danger? Is there no danger? What steps are you taking to move forwards? And that's really is tracking, which is that craft in anti-poaching. Okay, but what do we have to assume that the poachers know? Now, really, the advantage is always with the poachers because they know how to remain hidden from aircraft. They often even know when those aircraft are going to be flying over if it is in a set routine, which is not good to have. They know not to go near water points in the dry season, so you're not going to find tracks there. They also know where the stationary observation points, and they know who the anti-poaching team members are, because remember, there are times when poachers come from the very same village that the anti-poaching team members come from. Now, they may have been drawn into poaching for a multitude of different reasons, but they will often know who the anti-poaching team members are and where those stationary observation points are. They also know how to lay ambushes or trick trails for the anti-poaching teams. And very often they know what times scheduled anti-poaching patrols operate at. So this is why if you're running an anti-poaching team like Colin is, you have to keep all of these in mind and then make sure that you are trying to stay one step ahead. Now, Johan mentioned the Black Mamba Anti-Poaching Team Unit, which is an all-women unit in South Africa. And here we have on the right-hand side an image of them. Okay, so you want to follow, but you don't want to alert the poacher. So how do you do that? Well, first of all, you pick up the tracks in regions where it's been very difficult for the poachers to actually conceal their tracks. So they may have had to cross a dry riverbed. So therefore, you go and look at those riverbeds. Game trails, because obviously as humans and wildlife, we take the path of least resistance. So if there is a game trail, a buffalo trail, or an elephant trail, you're going to walk along that trail. But remember, the poachers don't want to be tracked. So they may go through the bush. But at some point, they may or may not have to access a water point, and I will come back to that a bit later. You also then have to determine how fresh the tracks are if you come across tracks. And that determines your decision, are you going to follow them or not? Because if they are old, you will need to collect evidence that is going to add into all of the data for your tracking team, but you may choose not to follow them. However, if they are very fresh, then you have to decide, if I'm going to follow them, is there a potential that those poachers are armed and dangerous? Therefore, am I in the position to follow them safely? Am I going to get my men killed if I follow them? If not, then you are able to go ahead. But if you're going to follow them, then the tracker, because remember the tracker is looking at those tracks. He's looking for the evidence and the information. Now, he at all times, he or she, should be flanked by 2 armed guards, or at least someone who is able to protect them, not just from poachers, also from predators. Because if you're focusing on the tracks and the track patterns, then you may be prey to some sort of dangerous game or from an ambush from the poachers. So that's quite important. All right. So in tracking the poachers, what are you looking for? And we're going to break this down into 2 things. We're going to say, first off, looking at the tracks as a collection of tracks. So the first thing you want to figure out is the direction of travel. And then you want to figure out how many poachers are in that group. Now, one way you can do this is to draw two lines with the tracks that are furthest apart. So the tracks that are furthest on the right to the furthest on the left. And you know that everybody walked in between those lines. And now try and determine how many pairs of tracks there are. Were there 3 people or 4 people or just one person? And then you have to think about how long ago, which is what we just spoke of. How old are the tracks? Okay, but now you're wanting to look at individual tracks within the collection, so the makeup of the group. If there are lots of people, then it might well be a full-scale poaching team, which means there might be ivory porters, there might be porters for food and water, if that's a longer and a more serious foray. So those groups, if it's a big group, they will stay away from water points. And they are going to be operating with speed and precision. And they are going to be armed, and they tend to wear manufactured footwear with no treads. So you're looking at what shoes are being worn that can give you a little bit of information of what's happening. Now, local poachers tend to operate in smaller groups, and they tend to wear locally made shoes, like from car tires, or they're barefoot. They're often slower, and they're actually make more use of counter tracking. So where the big group is coming right in, and their speed and precision, and they're armed, and they go and they get the rhino or the ivory, then they're out quickly. But the local ones are very careful, and they're very careful about being tracked, especially around waterholes. You want to look at what loads are being carried. So how can you determine from a track what load is being carried? Well, one of the ways is to look at how long is the step, because a shorter step and a deeper track, depending on the substrate, means that a heavier load is being carried. So you'd also want to look at the straddle. The straddle is how far apart your feet are in that track, and the toe direction. Because if a load is being carried, then the toes are going to be pointing more outwards, and the straddle will widen because your feet are taking the bulk of that load. So they're going to be further apart. So your straddle and your toe direction are very important. Now, look at resting points. So this is a point where something has been put down, a container or a bag, or sometimes the barrel of a gun, which will tell you if those poachers are armed. Now, look at how often those resting points are happening, because that will tell you the weight of the load. So is it a precision team that's carrying their water, carrying their food, carrying everything they need? And then equate the weight of what you think the load that they have and their speed of travel. And think about how fast that group could travel. And then make sure you alert the rest of the anti-poaching team to say where you would like them to be if this is a group that is still in the protected area and on the move. All right, so what is the crucial information? Well, first off, is the group carrying weapons? You have to think logically. Can your few trackers take on an armed group? And again, I say, look for imprints on the ground of rifle butts. And that imprint will give you a clue as to the weapon type. And the weapon type will then indicate the type of poaching group. Now, professional poachers will often have a heavy caliber sporting rifle because they're going for elephants and rhino. But they will often also have a number of assault rifles, and that's for defense from the anti-poaching teams. So that's what you're looking for when you're looking for rifle butt imprints on the ground. Okay, now a local poaching group will have AK-47s. So you'll see that again in that rifle imprint. They might have poisoned arrows, spears, and maybe a shotgun that they've made. Then you also want to think of the makeup of men and women in the group. Why? Because that is for prosecution needs down the line if you catch the group. So how do you determine that? Well, women often point their toes more inward. and their straddle, and remember that's the width between the line of the tracks on the right and the left feet, that's much narrower than a man's. And sometimes their feet will almost overlap in what we call a catwalk pattern. Men, of course, walk with their feet further apart, and their toes tend to point a bit more outward because they're carrying a heavier load in their body. So stature is important, because if a capture is planned, then you need to think for prosecution, because the height of the person is directly proportional to their foot length. And in fact, it's about 6.5 times the length of a bare foot. And that tells you the height of the person. So you can be collecting this, which is fascinating, because you walk on there, you're not seeing evidence, you're collecting information, because you're building up the story, like Colin said, from the beginning to the end. Who is in the group and how tall are those people? And of course, this will vary with ethnicity and other factors. So it won't always be the 6.5 times the length of the bare foot. You can do this when you're home this evening and see how tall you are. Now, of course, the weight of each individual member is important, because this also gives you information towards prosecution. So the width of the heel print is greater proportionally to the length of the foot. So let me break that down. So the thinner the heel, the skinnier the owner. And the thicker the heel, the heavier the owner of that track. So do you see how we're really starting to build a picture here? And then you have to ask yourself, are you truly seeing all of the tracks, or has the group split and then are planning to meet up again at a different point? So if you are the anti-poaching team, you certainly don't want to realize that you're only tracking half of the poachers and the other half is going to ambush you. So you need to really follow this story from beginning to end and see if there has been a split in the group. All right, so counter-tracking and anti-tracking. And this is talking about how do poachers actually conceal their tracks. Well, often they will not walk on ground that will leave tracks. So they'll walk in places where there won't be a track left, on stone, for example. Now, they will not often approach roads or large game trails if they're out there, if they're not subsistence. Subsistence often don't mind too much, but the big groups are not going to approach roads or large game trails because they don't want to leave a track. If they have to cross a dry riverbed, they will do this in different ways. Either they'll approach it from a 45-degree angle and leave it at a different angle after crossing, or sometimes they cross that dry river backwards so that you're tracking them in the wrong direction, or sometimes they'll only walk on their toes. And the other thing that they will do is they will sometimes use a deterrent. And these are photos we took from the Lower Zambezi, where poachers were using the skins of the feet of baby elephants. So they tied these over their shoes. So it was very difficult to track them because it appeared like you were tracking an elephant. So these are some of the tricks, and of course there are many more. All right, so Colin spoke about the scent power of the canine unit. So in the canine unit, you will have a handler and someone protecting them. And then you will have the communicator and someone protecting them. So often we use Belgian Malinois or breeds that are crossbreeds with this, and for some reason a bloodhound here. So with this bloodhound, again, if they're purebred dogs coming into an area in Africa, you'll often find that they're very susceptible to illness or ticks or injuries. So it's very good to crossbreed with local dogs so that they really are able to live in that area. So we've said then that the importance is the relationship between the dog and his handler, which is critical. And the dog needs to love tracking, and it needs to receive constant love and affection. And remember that the main asset of the dog that we are making use of is its scent ability, not the aggression ability. Please remember that. It is the scent ability and not the aggression ability. Yes, aggression is a tool, but there are actually only 3 times that that tool would be used. The first one is to protect itself. If that dog is attacked, and that could also be by a predator or by the poachers, it can use aggression to protect itself. If its handler is attacked, the dog will use aggression. And if you need to apprehend a suspect, but there is no other way possible, then you can use the aggression of the dog. But remember, you also can go to court because you've caused damage. If you set your dog on someone and it turns out that you've got the wrong person, you're going to court. So it is always controlled aggression. And it's rather used as an intimidation tool to subdues the poacher. So the poacher's like, no, 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 take me, it's fine, I don't want that dog to attack me. You don't really want your dog to attack that poacher. And again, that comes back to that relationship between the dog and his or her handler. Now, in the training of that dog, you have to imagine that in a situation where that poacher is apprehended, there's shouting and there's gunfire and there's chaos. Now, any person or dog is going to find that a negative experience because it's all overwhelming. So in the training of that dog, those things need to become positive experiences. The dog needs to associate those noises and the gunfire and the shouting as something that's not going to harm it, but something that it can get involved in. And that's so as the dog's abilities are not undermined. So often then in training, you avoid using the dog to bring down the suspect, but you get it used to tracking and herding the suspect. And then at the very end of its training, you introduce it to the fun, and I put inverted commas around that, the fun aspect of the final arrest with loud but safe noises in the training, crashing, gunfire, new smells, so that that dog in the real situation doesn't suddenly turn and flee. And then it also doesn't act irrationally if that happens in the field, because if you have an irrational dog, that's not going to help you. Okay, so I just want to talk about Wildlife Act in KwaZulu-Natal. Now, I know quite a few of you from TUT do some internships there. Now, they have canine units, and this is a collaboration of private sector organizations and Ezemvelo KZN Wildlife, and they have bandied together to establish a dog unit. And this dog unit is known as the HIP Canine Unit, and it operates inside Shishlu-Mfolozi National Park, and it already has had some great success. So in the first 6 months, it had 3 notable successes, 3 arrests, and a number of poaching groups that were actually interrupted before they managed to poach a rhino, actually. So that canine unit is adopting a proactive approach. Remember, we had proactive, reactive, and follow-up. Well, this is a proactive. They were out there working in the field, and they managed to apprehend those poachers before they hit the rhinos. Now, in this unit, they have 2 handlers and 2 cold scent dogs, and those are actually the pictures of the dogs. So those are Doberman cross bloodhounds. And both breeds can follow scents that are up to 8 hours old. So that is how their scent is so important. So the use of canines is a very effective tool, and it's been used successfully in Kruger and across loads of parts of Africa. And they're very useful in many ways for law enforcement. So a dog's nose has 50 times more scent receptors than humans, which is an incredibly valuable tool. And it is of crucial importance to combat the determined and the ever-evolving poaching teams, because those poaching teams are pretty sophisticated. They know how to hide their tracks, and they know how to hide inside protected areas. So in this poaching unit, they've been anti-poaching unit with their canines, they've been incredibly successful. All right, so I'm going to leave the canine unit behind. And I'm going to say another reason that you are going to be tracking is an injured animal. Now, in terms of injured animals, they're even more dangerous than an animal that is not injured. And encountering these dangerous game animals, you have to prepare yourself for an encounter because you don't want a confrontation, but it might happen. So you have to know how to deal with it. And remember, I want to highlight here that people who take unnecessary risks are not brave, they're stupid, right? There is no place for bravado in tracking or being out in the bush, because there is nothing more dangerous than a wounded animal. Don't test it, because there are always exceptions to the rule. Okay, so why would we be tracking an injured animal? Well, you might be because of a failed poaching attempt. So again, we're reactive here. So you've realized something injured, you're tracking it, you need to figure out, was it damaged by poachers? Is it still alive? And this is most likely in a conservation management scenario. Or the animal has sustained a spear or a gunshot wound. Or maybe it's just a snare that it has and it's pulled away from the anchor tree. So how are you going to track this injured animal? Well, you might be doing it in a vehicle, you might be doing it by foot, or you might be doing it on foot with a canine unit. And when are you going to be doing this? Well, please, unless you absolutely have to, do not do it at night. And don't do it when you're tired or you're super stressed, because making a mistake will be life-threatening. So if you're an individual or you're a team, you have to assess the condition of your team. So that brings us to, who would you be doing this with? Well, with backup. Never ever track an injured animal on your own, full stop. There is no giving way to that rule. And where are you going to be doing this? Well, this could be along a boundary fence, it could be in a poaching zone, it could be in a protected area thing. And the three key rules: be calm, keep your head about you, and do not do it alone. All right, so where do we start then if we're tracking this injured animal? The first thing I want you to remember is that potentially a predator could be on the prowl, and this could be an opportunistic predator. So if you're so focusing on your tracking and you forget you're walking past a river and there's a crocodile there, then your dog or you might have a serious problem. So please be very aware. So the first thing you have to do is locate the animal's path, because remember, we're tracking an injured animal that may have been damaged by a human, but it could also have been a fight or a snare or anything else. Then once you've found it, look carefully at the trail. Now, zebra people, I want you to keep awake here, because we are coming to your slides soon, and this may determine some of the points you would like to raise. So you need to determine how bad the wounds may be. Now, this can be indicated by the amount of blood or tissue that you're seeing. So as you're tracking that path, how much blood are you seeing? Is there any tissue that you're seeing? And think of the smell, because if it's an old wound, then the suppuration of that wound will mean the smell is really bad. All right, where on the wound could the body be located? Now, this is where you think, is there, sorry, my dogs are barking, is there blood higher up on the vegetation? Because then that could, Jackie, sorry, 1 second. Okay, so if there is blood higher up on the vegetation, then you can probably say that the wound is higher up on the animal. But if there is only a trail of blood on the ground, you first determine how much, and then you can determine, is that a superficial wound or not? Like, is it a wound that is a big wound or just a small wound? And then, of course, you're looking at the blood color. Again, zebra people, please keep aware. Is it bright red blood? If it is bright red blood, then this could be arterial bleeding. And probably if it's arterial bleeding, that animal's going to be dead before you even find it. So that's not a great sign if you want to attempt a capture and treatment. But if it's pink frothy blood with chunks of tissue, then that could be lung damage. And again, there's not much chance of you being able to deal with that one. I'm afraid that animal will die before you get to it. So these are all signs that you're looking for. All right, how are you going to go on? Well, the first thing is you look at the trail and you're asking, is there drag? Drag could be either a leg that's broken, that is dragging like in that track, or is there the tail end of a wire? If there's the tail end of a wire, then it could mean that there's a snare, and perhaps if there's also drag from a leg, that the leg is broken because of the effects of the snare. Or it could be something simple, like there's been a fight and an animal has fallen off a rocky ledge or into a hole and therefore is dragging itself. Is there blood on the tall grass or bush? And again, we said that will show how high on the body the wound is. But also you want to look, is there blood on both sides of the vegetation? Because that means there's an exit wound. If a bullet has gone into an animal on one side and come out of the other, then there's an exit wound. And then there may be blood on both sides of the trail that you're following with that wildlife. Then you want to look for broken branches and trampled grass or even disturbed soil. And this will tell you where the animal's gone. And also you're looking for blood again on those things. And if there is no blood, things like broken branches, trampled grass, disturbed soil, they're going to show you the direction. All right, so you've lost the trail. What do? Well, you backtrack to the last visible blood spot. You fan out in your team, and then you walk, and if necessary, you crawl in small circles until you pick up that trail again. Let's say it's still lost. So stop and think really carefully. Think like the animal that you are tracking. Would you go into the thickest brush or bush in the area? The animal that you're tracking, would it perhaps head to water? Because injured animals often do, so you may be able to pick up its track again there. Think about the places that animals have gone in the past with your experience and look there. So if the trackers lose the spoor, they must first search obvious places and they're looking for signs. They choose different likely access points through the bush in the general direction of the movement in the hope that they're going to pick up that trail again. And when you work together as a team, you can fan out, like we said, and hopefully somebody will find that trail. All right, so the important thing is being able to look and see more. And to get good at tracking, it needs to be a regular experience. Your observation techniques need to use all of your 5 senses. You need to think like that animal, and you need to use all of the ethology information that you have. You need to ask key questions. You have to know how to describe what you can see to your teammates. So you can't just say, over there near that soil. Is it far distance, near distance, or middle horizon? Use the hours of the clock. Is the track at 12 o'clock, middle horizon? How far off the ground? What tree is it? You need to know the names of your trees. And are there obvious traits or territories that you know about? For example, if you work in an area, you might know that there's been a territorial fight. So there might be a dead lion or, you know, any other thing. So you really have to, know what's going on in your area. And always focus on elimination rather than the opposite, right? So don't try and guess what it is. Try and eliminate what it isn't. All right, I am now moving on to the zebra scene, and I want to ask, what can we see? We're talking about blood. How much is that blood? Where is that blood? Think about the drag marks of what? Think about how those move. Indicator species such as predator and audios. So can we unmute the zebra team? I'm looking at my paper here to say who is in the zebra team. So John William, can you give us a bit of an insight here, please?
Okay, good morning, everybody.
Morning.
The following signs we will look at when we come across the spurs, the amount and frequency of blood. That will tell us how badly wounded the animal is and how fast the animal is moving. Pools of blood will indicate it's standing still. Where the blood is located on the vegetation will show the location of the wound. How old the blood is or how dry the blood is. The color of the blood will also give us an indication of how badly the animal is wounded and what type of wound. For instance, blood that comes from lungs are more oxygenated and therefore more lighter red color than blood that comes from major arteries is dark, thick color. If an animal has a stomach wound, you'd often find stomach content with the blood, and there will be not as much blood when it's a stomach wound. If you find drag marks, we can assume that the animal has a foot-related injury. We know that zebras are group animals, and if the spoor is alone, we can assume that it's definitely wounded. Wounded animals tend to leave groups. We look for other species like blue wildebeest. Zebra often move with wildebeest. We will look for scavengers, signs of a hyena or jackal that often follow wounded animals. We will frequently stop and listen to hear for rustling in thickets or in grass. Wounded animals tend to go and lie down in thickets, and once you approach their direction, they tend to try and get up, which makes a lot of noise. That would give away their position. One can often smell rotting fresh flesh from a wind down direction. This will indicate that the animal might already be dead for a few days or the wound is old. When you are in very thick bush, one can often smell the animal when you are close.
Okay, thank you, John. I'm going to stop you there before you cover all sorts of points. Very good. And I'm glad to see you're taking note of the lecture so far. Angel, what can you add in there? And think outside the box here. Like, what are we seeing in this picture?
Well, on the picture, we can clearly see that the snake is digging deeply on both of the zebra's legs.
Okay, and tell me, is that zebra alive or is that zebra dead? And how can you tell just from that image? No? Okay, I'm not going to give it away right now. I want the rest of you in the zebra group to be thinking about that.
I believe I was muted. So I believe that the zebra is still alive because of, I don't know, but the eyes are open. I can see that the eyes are open, so I believe it's still alive.
Okay, you're very close with the eyes. Give me something more about the eyes. What happens to a dead animal's eyes?
I don't know, but I think they close in a way. Yeah.
They don't necessarily close, but they lose their shine and the dust goes over them very quickly. That zebra still has a shine in its eye. So that zebra is still alive. So Angel, we're talking about two things here, and I want the rest of your zebra group to think about this. You're talking about tracking an injured animal. So you haven't found this zebra yet. So what are you looking for? And then the second thing is you've come upon this zebra now, and it's well, I don't want to give too much away, but this is what you're seeing. So Angel, if we're talking about tracking it, what else are we looking for as we track it?
Well, I believe John covered most of the things about us looking for the trails.
He was a bit of an eager beaver, he was, but do give us anyway, even if you repeat, that's fine.
Yes, the amount of blood we see on the trails will tell us how seriously injured the animal is. And then we need to look at the drag marks. We need to also look at the animal, if the animal is dragging something on its foot or so forth.
Okay, beautiful, Angel, thank you. And Ndoyezo, can you come in here and also mention in your bit about indicator species? What on earth am I talking about when I mention indicator species?
Holly, Ngwenya Mtunzi is not in, and I've asked Sinehlahla Yinene to unmute because I'm not sure if it's him that's part of the group. And then Simelani Sihle is also unfortunately not with us anymore. I think they might have moved on to other classes. I'm not sure.
Okay, so I can't say Sinistraba. Can you have a say here? No, is she unmuted?
No, but I see okay, there we go.
Good morning. My name is Ndai Zoraudisa. I'm a second year student at Tshwane University of Technology. The question asks, what are indicator species? Indicator species are species like scavengers, vultures, and predators, which can be there to indicate the environmental health or to show that something is happening near them. I can answer the other question that says drag marks. Drag marks of what? With drag marks, we can, drag marks possibly explain that the animal was trying to get away from the snare or from the trap, that where it was trapped, and the drag marks shows that the zebra has been injured and it is struggling to walk. It can also mean that the animal has fallen.
Okay,
thank you.
Yeah, that's perfect. I'm going to, for the idea of time, because we're a little bit over, I'm going to go through this scene. So in tracking this zebra, you're going to have blood at ground level. You're not going to have blood higher up on the vegetation. And there will also be a clear indication from the tracks which foot is damaged. Where is the main damage? So you should be able to determine that it is the front right and that the back right is also somehow ensnared. Now, you should probably find this zebra not far from where the snaring happened. And how do I know that? Well, you can see that snare wound is very deep on the front right, which shows it's been pulling and pulling and pulling, and it's been a while at that pull until the snare broke from the tree. So there's been quite a lot of damage. Now, while it broke away, it managed to tangle its back right foot up in the snare. So that could also be trailing. So you will see some signs of that on the substrate, but because there's not the actual end of the wire trailing, you're getting the middle of the wire. That's how you can kind of assess that the feet must be tied up somehow, and it won't be stretching those right side of its legs far apart. So it wouldn't be able to walk well in that distraught situation. So it probably moved a little, and then it was finally left behind by its herd. Now, it probably collapsed from exhaustion. And how would I know that? I would know because there would be no signs of a scuffle and trying to fight its way up on the ground. There would just be clean sand all around. Then what I reckon happened, and of course I was not at this incident, so I'm interpreting this and collecting evidence. I would say that it was found by humans. And then in its fear, it struggled and fought and lunged to get up. And then it managed to, but then it collapsed a short distance away from where the photo was taken. And how can I guess that? Well, if you look at that ground all around that zebra, it's all scuffed up. So it shows it's exhausted. And in fact, and the very fact that there's a photo means that humans were present. So we can assume that they reached the animal, it tried to escape, it became stressed and tense, it collapsed again, and then this photo was taken. All right, so we found the zebra. Now the zebra in this photo is most probably not dead. Again, I'm not on the scene, I wasn't at this place, so I cannot tell you definitively, but it is unlikely that a snare like that is going to cause death because it is not affecting any vital activities like breathing. Now look at its nostrils in that photo. Do you see that the nostrils are flaring? There's air in those nostrils. And although you cannot see the eye very well, you can see that it does have a glint in the eye. And the eyes of a dead animal, like I said, often have that film of sand. There's also fresh blood. We spoke about the color of the blood. Now, this looks like it's still oxygenated. Now, if you look at the abdominal muscle and the skin position on the belly, look at those bulging veins. That shows there's still strain, probably from exhaustion. And you can see that the legs are being held in that position. So that zebra to me is very much alive. So how do you deal with it? Well, zebras are notoriously difficult to deal with, and they're incredibly dangerous when they kick or they bite. So you never deal with a zebra on your own. If there are no sedatives available, then the first thing you do is cover the head. Take a shirt off, take a sack, cover that head and calm the animal down. Put a sack over the eyes and then rope the back legs together. Someone kneel on the zebra's neck, someone sit on their side and make sure the front legs are also tied. Then you remove the snare with your trusty Leatherman or whatever tool you have, your iodine or your betadine it, and then you make sure the rear legs are tied with a lasso knot. Because when the zebra is going to now get up and fight, that knot needs to loosen. Then all the people stand back, take the head covering off, and the zebra will fight to get up. And as it gets up, that noose will become loose, the knot on it, and it will flee, even if it doesn't go very far, depending on the injury. And with time, an injury like this should heal. So well done, zebra team. And just to end, I just want to say that conservationists, they do face a grim tomorrow, but boy, do they fight for a better future for all of us. And that's with or without your support. So I think, Johan, if you can do any questions that have come up in the chat. I'm sorry we've gone a little bit over, but thank you everyone for hanging in there.
Thank you, Hollie, and thank you to the Rhino and Zebra team. I know that many of you had to get going to get to classes, but it's really, Hollie, we didn't have a chance to introduce you in the beginning. It doesn't have to be said that you are extremely knowledgeable and an excellent presenter by now. By now, they've experienced it. Thank you so much for what you did this morning. We really, really appreciate it. John, you've got a question. Please go ahead and unmute and drive safe, eh? You still need to unmute, unfortunately. There we go.
On behalf of the second year nature conservation students of TUT, we'd just like to thank you, Ms. McGog and Mr. Krier, for presenting us with the knowledge you have today.
Thank you very much, John. I hope it comes in use if any of you decide to go into the field. Safe drive.
Thank you very much, man.
Thank you, John. Appreciate it. Hollie, I suspect that most of the students had to, unfortunately, at this stage, start running to other classes. But everybody, if you would like to ask a question, you can write in the chat, or you can connect with us. Raise your hand with the tools at the bottom of the screen. We would love to answer your questions and interact with you.
And also at some point, if anyone would like to stay behind while I go over the rhino poaching scene, that is also fine at the end. So go ahead.
I am not sure if there we go. There we've got a question from Chloe. I just want to mention special welcome to the visitors from Nigeria.
Thank you for the opportunity. My question is based on approaching as a whole. You will agree with me if I can say most of people who are committing the poaching scene are mostly from our communities and our brothers and fathers and uncles. So to that point, I have a few questions to what drive them, who is behind their act, and what motivates them. So based on this, I want to briefly get maybe an idea on the approach of nature conservation to what drive our brother and sister to commit these poaching sins. That's my question.
So I guess the first thing is to know that the first thing you said was your brothers, your fathers, your uncles. I want all of you to be very aware that the fastest growing group of trackers is women. And this is a field that requires intense understanding of the environment around you. and the ability to understand the motives of the poachers. And often women do have this incredible sixth sense that men don't seem to have. And of course, that's a blanket opinion, but it does appear to be the case. Now, what are the motives for getting involved in poaching? Now, remember, we had commercial hunting, we had subsistence poaching. So the motives are very different. Subsistence poaching is going to be poverty. It's going to be economic indignity. You simply don't have the ability to wake up every morning and know that you're going to have enough food for your family for that day. That is economic indignity. So that is when you're in a socio-economic trap. So your motivation will be to either bring food for your family or to be able to sell that to get money for your family or to trade. Now, if you're a commercial poacher, the money and the greed is the motive, really. And those are two simple things to say, money and greed. And of course, it's a lot more complex, but those really underlie every other motive. So does that make sense to you, Frau? And maybe we move on to the next question to keep up with time.
Claude, did that answer your question, or would you like to ask a follow-up question on that?
It's clear, thank you.
Thank you for your question. It's a very important question.
Okay, so I'm just looking through the chat box here. And one of the questions from Gina is, how would we go about it if it rained and evidence faded away? It's very difficult. That's why you've got to be out there the whole time, and you've got to have teams that can get in there as quick as possible. But of course, dogs can still track. Even if the evidence has disappeared, the smells may still be there. Okay, well, I think that brings us all. This recording will be put up on the YouTube, and you will be able to get the full rhino scene investigation and the zebra scene investigation, as well as some other information from it. So thank you, everyone, very much indeed.
Thank you, Hollie. And just to mention that next week we will have somebody from the South African government, from Environmental Affairs, to have a look at the legal implications and the legal processing of crime scenes. So that's going to be a fascinating discussion. And we will also have another look at crime scenes with senior investigators from South African National Parks. So please stick with us. We hope that you will benefit from this journey. Thank you very much. We'll see you next week.